Okay, I thought tonight, and I know that most of you know this, but I thought it was important to talk about Dr. Lamsa tonight because we are presenting here what I call the Aramaic interpretation, um, and it is unique, very different from traditional stuff, and it's Dr. Lamsa and his credentials that uh, literally give life to this interpretation. So, Dr. Lamsa, I can kind of read it here, but I'll fill it in. Um, all right. He is an Assyrian, Assyryan, and that is an ancient, very ancient order. Remember, the Assyrians attacked Israel, all that stuff. Anyway, um, he is an Assyrian, and the Assyrians and his tribe hid, actually. They went to the in the Kurdistan mountains. The name of the town is Marbishu. Um, and so they went there before Constantine and the Romans and all that kind of stuff. And they remained, he and his tribal people remained there remotely, no access to other civilization until the early 1900s. And so what makes him unique and creditable? Okay, he's not just he's not just another scholar that came along, and certainly we got lots more joining the band nowadays, but the key here is he lived the culture and he knew the language. He grew up with it. He spoke Aramaic and he knew the language back before the language, even the classical language that we use now. He knew it. He was able to translate and he knew the context because he lived it. So I just wanted to go over that one more time because that is what makes these interpretations credible. Okay, I will mention Dr. Erico because he's been going along here for 60 years, 60 plus years, and he actually studied under under and with Dr. Lamsa for 10 years. And so we have him to thank for the expansion of what Dr. Lamsa knew. And gosh, there's even still today so much more. So, anyway, okay. All right. So, I I labeled this Jesus and the Fraternal Supper. Okay. Now, but before we get into the supper and the significance of it, I wanted to just take a little bit of time and talk about Jesus. Um, because last week, we focused on the betrayal and Judas and whatnot, but um, some on Jesus. But what I wanted to bring up um, is our uh, our interpretation, our teachings, we view Jesus as a human being, just like any of us. And um, and why that's so significant, especially at this point in Scripture, is because, and it's like, um, I want to ask, um, what was Jesus feeling in all of this? And Jesus had been teaching for 3.5 years. He was constantly challenged by the scribes, the Pharisees, the higher ups, and they sought to kill him several times, and he managed to avoid avoid it. And so, but if you think of him as maybe yourself or as any human being, he had a cause, and he he taught and he stuck with his cause, but he was totally, maybe not totally, um, but what he taught challenged the the Jewish tradition and laws, not to change them, not to do away with them, but he was trying to tell them that they were missing the mark in many ways. There was corruption and whatnot. But as Jesus, he, he entered Jerusalem, and we talked about the experience last week. Um, and it wasn't the great experience, the great welcoming into Jerusalem with the white horses. It was not that. Okay. And while Jesus knew exactly why, what he was doing, but imagine how he must have felt. And at that point in time, he felt the disciples. You can feel it, that they were questioning and all of that. So anyway, and when he got into Jerusalem, um, I wanted to talk about the money changer situation first before we actually go to the supper. So I just have these two different scriptures. They actually are in all four gospels, but I have John and I have Matthew. So let's just read the scriptures and then we'll talk about it. John 2:14 through 17.
And he found in the temple those who were buying oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers sitting. And he made a whip of cord and drove them all out of the temple, and even the sheep and the oxen and the money changers. And he threw out their exchange money and upset their trays. And to those who sold doves, he said, take these away from here. Do not make my father's house a house of trading. And his disciples remembered that it is written, the zeal for thy house has given me courage.
Okay, and then I have from Mark 11:12 through 13.
And Jesus entered into the temple of God and drove out all who were buying and selling in the temple. And he overturned the trays of the money changers and the stands of those who sold doves. And he said to them, it is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer, but you have made it a bandit's cave.
Okay, so these scriptures about Jesus chasing out the money changers and all that, um, are debated all the time. Uh, and there's also this, it's part of the Christian theology that says that Jesus was sinless and that um, he did not sin and all, which we're not going to get into tonight. But um, we just talked about Jesus had to be frustrated. He had to be disappointed. Um, if you can, if you can just imagine everything. And so when he went to the temple and he saw what he saw, you know, he did get angry. And that's a, I mean, that's nothing against Jesus. He did get a little angry, all right, and he reacted a little bit, but he didn't hurt anybody. Um, he didn't hurt anybody, but he was frustrated, and so what they say, what they say, um, I'll get back to that. Is now the other thing is people say how he didn't have any right to do that, because it was in a temple. But no, here's the situation, and I'm sorry I don't have the picture, but everything is in storage and whatnot. But the temple itself had huge, large courtyards um, around the main part of it, and so what had happened, okay, and you know that for feast days, people came to town and they had to sacrifice animals, whatever, animals, whoever. All right. And so yes, they did have to purchase, you know, um, auction doves, whatever they were going to do. Yes, they did have to purchase those. But what had happened is that there were legitimate sellers in the temple. And it would kind of be like today, all right, uh, in in the city or wherever. Nowadays, you have to have a vendor's license in order to do stuff, but of course, they didn't have that all back then, and and so uh, so what they would what they would do is everybody wanted to make money. That's not any different than now. And so, Jesus was only after the illegitimate people who had come and squatted in there, and they would make money and probably charge less than the temple or whatever. And the role of the money changers was when you actually did take your sacrifice to the temple, the actual place, you had to use temple money. You couldn't use any other money. And so that's what the money changers did. Anyway, so the priests and scribes had introduced these businesses into the temple courts for their own material gains. Sound familiar? Therefore, Jesus cleansed the temple, which had become a den of thieves, by throwing out all the illegitimate businesses. He also overturned the trays of those who were exchanged foreign money for temple coins and the trays of those who sold sheep and cattle for sacrifices. These businesses did not belong in this area of the temple. The temple was to be a house of prayer. Jesus did not put out the regular merchants. He only threw out the money changers and those who were buying animals in advance of the Passover to hold for large profits. I mean, it could be America to, I mean, it's the same thing. He overturned the trays of money changers who were not there legally. And this is just a couple of words here. You know, when I lived in Georgia, there were several really uh, big, uh, I want to say Baptist churches and whatnot, and they were the same way. You would see, um, you would say, every week you'd see like a brand new car or something sitting outside and all this outside in the front of the church, and and I'm just making the comparison that it's very similar today. But mainly, I guess I wanted to justify Jesus in terms of he was very frustrated and to see the temple that was supposed to be a house of prayer, just in all of this, whatever, commercialism or whatever you want to call it. So I wanted to cover that scriptures. And now, okay, now we're going to talk about the fraternal supper. Now, remember, um, some will say, even in the Bible, they'll say that it's a Passover supper. That's known as a Seder. But it really wasn't that. And when you see what went on uh, at the communal fraternal supper, I think you can probably concede that no, this was not your standard Passover meal. Okay, so just some cultural things. Um, okay, number one, I had the picture here is essentially it's um, what Leonardo da Vinci painted. All right, and it's just it's the uh, it's the Italian Greek culture painting of the Last Supper, but there were no tables at the Last Supper. There were no tables hardly anywhere, not even in homes. And so what it really was, and I'm sorry I don't have a better picture, but the reason I don't is because most people don't realize this. Okay, so this is not a real great picture, but notice, okay, they're sitting in a circle. All right, that's the only thing that's really representative here. Um, except that, okay, they would have had their hats on, which is kind of represented here. Uh, they would have had their shoes off, and they would be sitting on the floor, um, around a circular cloth. So that's just that's one of the cultural things that we learn from the Aramaic. And so when we're reading this, picture them sitting in a circle, not sitting at a table like this. And I always like to say, we talked a little bit about the sops and passing the sops, but and I don't know how many whatever celebrations, weddings or whatnot she went to, and this is the tables are set up, long tables, and it's really a pain. You can't basically talk to the guy at the other end of the table. And so this passing of the sops and everything that's described just couldn't happen at a table like that. Anyway, all right. So we are going to go um, to the Last Supper, and we're going to go to John because John um, described something that's really significant in terms of what it means. And so we're going to look at the washing of the feet, which is in John. So, John 13, 4 through 6.
Rose from supper and laid aside his robe, and he took a cloth and tied it around his loins. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the feet of his disciples and to wipe them with the cloth which was tied around his loins. When he came to Simon Peter, Simon said to him, "Are you, my Lord, going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, saying to him, "What am I doing? You do not know now, but later you will understand." Then Simon Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus said to him, "If I do not wash you, you have no part with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Then, my Lord, wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "He who has bathed does not need except to wash his feet only, for he is already all clean. So you are all clean, but not every one of you."
Okay. And
For Jesus knew him who was to betray him. Therefore he said, "Not every one of you is clean." When he had washed their feet, he put on his robe and sat down, and he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and what you say is well, for I am. If I, then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, how much more should you wash one another's feet? For I have given you this as an example, so that just as I have done to you, you should also do. Truly, truly, I say to you, there is no servant who is greater than his master, and no apostle who is greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them.
okay. Go ahead and read this one.
A new commandment I give you, that you love one another just as I have loved you, that you may also love one another. By this every man shall know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.
Okay. So, this fraternal supper is really a supper of love. And as we talked about Jesus, uh, and though he was, I just can't imagine how he must have felt. Um, Judas betrayed him, but yet he still viewed Judas as a friend. Um, he didn't stop loving Judas because Judas had made a mistake. Okay, and it's the same thing. So the Last Supper, what do we get out of it? Normally, we breeze through it. That was the betrayal, da da da. But no, if you look at washing the feet, uh, it's just it's pure love on Jesus' part. And let's look at what we got here. Okay, the gospel writers revealed the heart of Jesus, which was behind all his teachings. They revealed his love for humanity, his humility, and his willingness to surrender his life for those who had gone astray and lost their way. Now, Jesus desired that his disciples and followers conduct their lives differently from that of the masses and the political and religious leaders of the world. Concerning their behavior as leaders, and this is the one of the main points of the washing of feet. They were to be equal in rank, and the greatest one among them was to be the servant. And hold on here. All right, let's finish this. And I did take most of this directly from the commentary, I will tell you, uh, just because of the way it's written, and I felt that it might be better understood. All right, so any apostle rejecting this washing of the feet that Jesus performed would not be able to participate in the ministry of Messiah Christ. The refusal on the part of that disciple would indicate that he wished to be a Lord over the others. Now, Peter, I mean, the disciple here was Peter, and uh, I don't know that he recognized that that was, he was just Peter. Peter was always um, maybe slow to understand, but not slow to act. Because Peter, uh, remember Peter jumped out of the boat with Jesus and all of that. And the other interesting thing about Peter is that Peter's name in Aramaic was Kepha, and Kepha means rock. Okay, and I always this may not be very respectful, but I always use this expression. Um, if you've ever heard, dumb as a rock. Peter was just, like I say, he was just slow to understand. And K-Paw, it was a nickname because everybody knew how Peter was. So just a little background on that. Um, so and and what Jesus was trying to tell them was that, look, no one, including himself, is better than the next guy. And I think one of the scriptures, I don't have it here, but I think it was James and John. Mother came to Jesus and said they wanted Jesus to favor James and John and sit at their left and right. And of course, Jesus said, no, 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 that's not the way we do things, basically. So it is a lesson, and it is a lesson of love. I mean, um, and if we could just do that, um, but I mean, it is unheard of for the CEO of a company to many times to even have a meal or even to say hello to the the lower people, whatever you want to call them. So um, just something that we can take away from this Last Supper, other than the usual traditional stuff. Okay. Um, Up until this time, no teacher had ever washed the feet of his servants or disciples. No great nobleman had served the humble and poor, not in any way. Jesus' way was so entirely different from anything they had ever known. Very true. Continues that way. Okay. Now, okay. Now we're going to read these scriptures. You all know, I'm sure you know them, but we're going to read Matthew and we're going to read Luke. Matthew 26, 26 through 28.
While they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Take, drink of it, all of you. This is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins."
Okay. And then Luke is similar, but I just put this one in here too. Luke 22, 17, and then 19 through 20.
And he took the cup and gave thanks and said, "Take this and divide it among yourselves." And he took the bread and gave thanks and broke it, and he gave it to them and said, "This is my body, which is given for your sake. This do in remembrance of me." And likewise also took the cup after they had eaten supper, and he said, "This is the cup of the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you."
Okay. Now, one thing you do want to notice here, it said his my blood, which is shed for you, but it doesn't say which is shed for your sins. Okay. Anyway, I just thought I would mention that. Okay. Now, this is what Jesus said, and um, Christian theology, um, all Christian churches, uh, at some point, some all the time, do the Eucharist, have the Eucharist, and they um, uh, the Eucharist and the grape juice or the wine, whichever. Anyway, and that is how these scripture that is how they interpreted these scriptures. However, going back to some basics here. All right. The Bible can't be taken literally all the time. Um, and then we're going to be talking about a specific idiom here. And an idiom is a word or group of words that say one thing but mean something else. That's just uh, a simple definition. And I just put one of our idioms there. It's raining cats and dogs. Now, you know what that says, but you know that doesn't happen. Um, it's symbolic. It just means it's raining really, really hard and stuff. Okay, no, this is significant because when Jesus said, "Eat my body and drink my blood," which is what Christian churches do all the time, literally, they took the Bible literally, but what I'm going to tell you is that is not what Jesus meant. Okay. To eat my body, okay, just meant to eat or to practice and partake of his teaching and make it a part of their lives, right? And to drink my blood is to be willing to suffer the consequences of adopting the gospel of the kingdom, continuing his cause. That's what he meant. Okay. Didn't have anything to do with actually eating his body, or drinking his blood. So, um, okay. Again, I took this directly from the commentary, um, just just because. So let me even go ahead and read this, um, and give you food for thought. Okay, Aramaic people still say he has eaten the book, meaning he memorized what is in the book. And I will just interject here and say, I probably have used the expression, but other people have. if you just read a book where somebody gave you a book and you say, man, I just ate it up. And you do that with anything. And that's what we're talking about here. Okay. Both the prophet Ezekiel and John, the Revelator, were told to eat the scroll. Okay. They had to remember what they read and make it a part of their predictions. When Semitic, and this is really interesting, when Semitic people work excessively hard or suffer, they say, I have eaten my body and drunk my blood, or I have eaten my father and mother. In very extreme cases, they will say, I have eaten my dead people. And they're just common um, sayings, figurative speech. And these sayings are so common in Aramaic speech that one can still hear them during ordinary conversations. Um, Interesting. Okay. Jesus compared himself. This is the cultural, the history behind it. Jesus compared himself to the lamb that the Jews were going to eat on Passover day and the blood of the lamb that spared the lives of their forefathers in Egypt. And that's what Passover was all about. Okay. They were symbolic of his body and blood, which were to be spiritually eaten and drunk by his followers to the end of time. And just once again, it was not a literal statement. And besides, and this is true, Jewish law prohibited anyone from even touching the blood of a dead person. And how could Jesus have literally meant for people to eat his body and drink his blood? Okay, now, all right. The Eucharist, also known as Holy Communion, this is Christian theology, okay, or Lord's Supper, is the central act of Christian worship and a sacrament instituted by Jesus at the Last Supper. It involves the consecration of bread and wine, which are believed to become the real body and blood of Christ, offered as a sacrifice and spiritual nourishment. Now, I wanted to put this in here in case some of you didn't really know about it because I was raised Catholic and I had no idea. Somebody mentioned this term to me. I mean, it's a number of years ago, and I go, huh? Even though I was Catholic, and I don't think very many Catholics know about transubstantiation. Transubstantiation is the Roman Catholic doctrine that during the Eucharist, the substance of bread and wine is miraculously changed into the actual body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. While the outward, well, forget that sentence, I was going to erase it, but just so that you know what transubstantiation is. And that is the heart and core of Christian theology. All right, so I am done. Um, those were the major things of the Last Supper. And I think the fraternal supper, and I think we can come away with a lot of love. And we did see forgiveness last week. So hopefully that's a little something on the Last Supper that maybe you knew about, maybe you didn't, but a little different than the usual traditional. Okay. And once again, we appreciate your contributions. And here we go. So I just put this in here, so based on all of this or whatever, what meaning do you take away from the Last Supper? Or do you have comments? We'd love to hear them.